Welcome to Awesome Movie Year, the podcast where we take a look back at an awesome year for movies, which is every year. My name is Josh Bell, film critic and writer, and I'm joined by my co-host.
I'm Jason Harris, filmmaker, comedian, and congratulations, Josh. For the 17th year in a row, you are the king of fools.
Oh, thank you. That's really lovely of you to designate me the ugliest person in Paris.
17 years in a row, not even close. You just are a runaway winner of this thing.
So kind of you. Just as kind as the people of Paris are to the title character of this film. We are adding to our season on the films of 1939 with this bonus episode on the Hunchback of Notre Dame. And I think two main reasons we picked this as a bonus for this season. One is that when we asked you, our lovely listeners, about your favorite 1939 movies before we started, this is the one that came up the most often. We didn't get a huge amount of responses, so I think it was maybe 4 people who mentioned this, but it wasn't something necessarily that was on my radar as a major film from this year. So it was interesting that even one person mentioned it as a favorite, and let alone several. So that kind of got our attention. And then the other thing is, as we went through this season, we realized that we were really delving into the career of supporting actor Thomas Mitchell, who appeared in 5 movies in 1939. And we talked about 4 of them just sort of coincidentally. And this is the 5th. So we thought we'd wrap up awesome Thomas Mitchell year by talking about the Hunchback of Notre Dame.
Thomas Mitchell, first actor inducted to the Awesome Movie Year Hall of Fame, taking his worthy place right next to Rob Reiner. And away we go, sir.
Yeah, quite the combination. I don't know if Thomas Mitchell and Rob Reiner, if their lives coincided so that they could have ever worked together, but
they could have, because didn't he worked, pretty much his entire career for like 50 years.
Right. I mean, when did that end, and when did Rob Reiner's career begin? It looks like, he died in 1962. So
that would be too. Yeah, maybe he could have worked for Carl Reiner, but not Rob.
Alternate universe in which Thomas Mitchell and Rob Reiner's careers collide. But as always, we're looking for something to do for a bonus episode, so we're happy to check this one out. And thank you to the people who suggested it in our social media callouts. And thanks for everyone. If you're listening to this on the By David Rosen Patreon, we appreciate your patronage. And if you're not, you can sign up for it and listen to these episodes early instead of when you're listening to them now.
Hey, Josh, we probably have mentioned this, but literally the next year he played William Robinson in Swiss Family Robinson. So he just kept, and he was in Angels Over Broadway in 1940. Thomas Mitchell was on quite a run here.
He was. If we get back to this time period, we'll have to do another awesome Thomas Mitchell year around this time while he's so working so steadily.
Yeah, I don't know if anyone will ever have a year like he had in 1939, but it's interesting to see who can stack, because we've talked about it throughout this season, who can stack up with a year like that.
Right. I mean, and as we've talked about a lot here too, actors and directors worked generally a lot more during this period because they're under contract to studios and they just kind of go from one project to another wherever a studio tells them to go. But Mitchell really rises above even other notable figures, I think, during this year in terms of the work that he did.
Yes, and I'm looking at his filmography right now. He did do 5 movies in 1944. I don't think they were as renowned as these, but he had another big year there.
Yeah, good for him. So this film, of course, is an adaptation of the classic novel by Victor Hugo, which by this time had already been adapted numerous times, although this is the first time that it had been made into a sound film. It was first adapted into a silent short film in 1905. So the very earliest days of film, people were eager to get this one down. I feel like this is similar to when we did our episode on Gulliver's Travels and we talked about Georges Méliès making a Gulliver's Travels adaptation in the even earlier than 1905, I think, in the earliest days of film. So something that people were eager to bring to the screen. The 1923 silent film starring Lon Chaney as the Hunchback of Notre Dame was the most well-known up to this point, and this was billed kind of as a remake of that. And I actually watched that film, which is a very impressive, huge production for 1923 with one of Lon Chaney's most notable performances. Of course, he's known for immersing himself in all of these roles with the extensive makeup and stuff like that. And he's a more like menacing looking hunchback than Charles Laughton is in this version.
Especially when he's walking with the Queen doing the Werewolves of London.
There's no werewolves in this.
Oh, hey, I was wondering because you watched the silent version, and as we know, Quasimodo is deaf. Did that play into the way that you as a viewer were able to experience the character, or how did they utilize that?
I mean, they definitely mention it. It definitely is said in one of the inner titles, but as in, I feel like less so in this movie, but a little bit. They say that he's deaf, but he's not really deaf. He's just kind of hard of hearing, right? I mean, he can hear the bells, as he says in this version. And I think in that one, it appears more that people are talking to him. But I believe, and I'm not 100% sure about this because I didn't write it down, but I believe Quasimodo himself may not have any dialogue or any of his own intertitles of words that he says. So he may not actually even really speak in that version.
So again, we did a lot of research. So maybe I'm mistaken. I think he reads lips, and the bells were the things that caused his deafness too.
Right. Yes. The bells are the things that caused his deafness. And I mean, in this version, he does specifically say, though, that he can still hear the bells. At one point, he says to Esmeralda, like, if you need me, ring the bells. I can hear them.
Yeah, I got to say, you're talking about Lon Chaney, a legend. Man, Charles Laughton, this dude brings it, huh?
He does. I mean, and I think I preferred his performance. It's a little more soulful. It's a little more nuanced. You get more of a sense of this character. I mean, and he gets to speak, at least, toward the end of the movie. So that certainly helps. Lon Chaney is more of this presence, right? He's more, like I said, he's more menacing, or he's just sort of shocking to look at. Whereas Laughton, I think, is trying to build more of a character.
Yeah, I really thought the makeup was pretty amazing in this one too.
Yeah, and Chaney's makeup is amazing too. And Chaney, of course, known for, I believe, also doing his own makeup. I mean, he's a pioneer of those performances, but also of movie makeup, which is crazy. So I definitely recommend checking that version out if you liked this one, or if you are interested in that story. It does some different things with the story, although some of the changes that it makes are similar to the changes that they make in this version, again, because this was sort of billed as a remake of that. But it was interesting to watch both of them.
The makeup artist on this one was Perk Westmore, and he hated Charles Laughton to the point where one day he invited his brother to set, and while strapping on the hump, Westmore sprayed Laughton in the face with a seltzer bottle full of quinine water and then kicked him in the butt. Westmore told Laughton, "That's for all the grief you gave me," and added that his brother was a witness and would deny anything Laughton said about the incident.
Jeez, man, that's harsh.
Well, there was a lot of, from the research, it sounds like Laughton was not the easiest gentleman to deal with.
Still, I can't imagine being sprayed with quinine water is healthy for anybody.
And also, you can't do that to an actor, you would be fired.
A person, anybody really, is not something you should do.
We're not talking about people. We're talking about actors, right, Josh.
Right. So this movie was a box office success, grossing $3.2 million on its budget of $1.8 million. But because that budget was so high, supposedly it only made $100,000 profit, but it was widely seen by audiences. It was nominated for 2 Oscars for Best Original Score and Best Sound, but did not win. And critics were not as enthused about this movie as I would have expected. It's kind of mixed reviews on this, really. And it's interesting that they regard it as sort of like a monster movie, which is not the way it seemed to me. But
yeah, that's pretty messed up.
Frank S. Nugent in the New York Times said, "Maybe we have grown squeamish in our old age. Maybe our acrophobia keeps us from enjoying the sight of the misshapen bell ringer of Notre Dame swinging in the belfry tower of the great cathedral. Maybe we are an exception to the rule laid down by one of the film's characters that ugliness is fascinating. It never has fascinated us. It is to Mr. Laughton's credit that he is able to act at all under his makeup, to suggest exultation, hatred, and to evoke pity. Yet we cannot truthfully say we enjoyed him or his picture. The film is almost unrelievedly brutal and without the saving grace of unreality which makes Frankenstein's horrors a little comic. The Hunchback belongs between the covers of his book, or back in the simpler days of the movies. He's a bit too coarse for our tastes now.
Well, they probably shouldn't have let AI write the script for this one.
It's interesting that he says this is so brutal, like it's a horror movie. I mean, I guess you could say that it's brutal in a way in its depiction of, class inequality or whatever.
It's unrelenting towards Quasimodo, I think, is what I took from that, because this guy, man, you just can't catch a break.
Yeah, that's one way to put it.
You mentioned the Academy Awards. No love for set design here or, production design?
Apparently not. And yeah, it is amazing. Although I will say, I mean, this one is amazing. The 1923 version maybe is even more astounding in terms of the sets that they built and all of that. But I agree. It's definitely an oversight to leave it out on that front, I think.
This is the second movie we've talked about. I think Gone with the Wind was the other one we've talked about a few this year, because Wuthering Heights also, where this is some of the best work of making locations look like what they're supposed to look like, because these are all shot in Southern California. And you feel like all of these are on the locations that they're supposed to be, in this case, Paris.
Right. Yeah. I mean, in fact, I think in this film and the 23 version, there were moments where I was like, did they actually go shoot something of this in Paris? Did they really build that entire, like, not just a doorway or whatever, but essentially the whole building that Quasimodo is climbing over? And yeah, they did. They built all of this stuff in Southern California, like you said.
Classic David Fincher.
So John Mosher in The New Yorker was also not super enthused. He said, "The Hunchback of Notre Dame displays Mr. Laughton as a Quasimodo so distorted and misshapen that little of the human being, much less of the actor, survives. With one eye alone left him by the monstrous structure that has been built about his head, he achieves something like a tour de force. The lines themselves, such modernisms as, quote, to buy protection, along with a perfunctory plot arrangement, are the weak features of this film, which otherwise is a vivid pictorial drama of 15th century Paris. For our unhallowed edification, the cathedral is presented in scenes of splendid photography, which is used with equal care to reveal the array of verminous laity of the Cour des Miracles, the Court of Miracles, that is."
Thank you for the translation.
Yeah.
Or should I say, merci.
Right. Well, The New Yorker, they're highfalutin there, using their French terms.
I can't give enough credit to Laughton, because yes, the makeup, we said, is amazing, but I feel like, this performance, like, you empathize, you sympathize, you get so many layers. Like this character, you're talking about monster movies, right? Like in lesser hands, this could have been that, right? Oh, look at this guy. He's a freak, blah, 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 all the nasty stuff. But this character is really, really emotionally, just kind of, you go along with him, and he does such a good job of making you feel for him and feel what he's feeling.
Yeah, I mean, what he's saying is like, oh, the makeup only leaves him with one eye to work with. Like, yeah, that's true. And that's why it's so impressive. Like you said, that under that, the performance comes across. And again, because he gets to speak, which is something that no performer in this role had yet been able to do, and that Lon Chaney wasn't able to do, he's able to express even more of that anguish that Quasimodo has, and you can sympathize with him even more, even though he kills like a bunch of people.
Quasimodo?
Yeah.
But everyone killed everyone back then.
I don't know.
Don't you remember? Don't you remember the Holy Grail movie? All right, I won't use that as an excuse, but I will use the nature versus nurture argument here, because Frollo basically kills his mom, takes him in, raises him, and teaches him all of these quote unquote ways of life. So he doesn't know anything but what his master Frollo tells him to do. So that's where I think his whole thing went off track, Josh.
Right. Well, and what I'm saying is that you can sympathize with him even though he does those terrible things, even though he kills all those people. And the situation itself, I mean, it builds and builds to the point where everyone is confused and there's these miscommunications and he thinks he's protecting Esmeralda, even though it's the opposite. And these people are there because they think they're trying to protect Esmeralda. So, I mean, you can sort of understand why he does what he does, even though he does pour like molten lead on people. I mean, that's pretty fucked up.
Molten metal.
Yeah, which must be something from the book, I would think, because Lon Chaney does it too, which is it's just pretty hardcore.
Yeah, it reminded me of the way they killed Khaleesi's brother in the first season of Game of Thrones with the melted gold onto his head.
Yeah, maybe that was an homage to this. Who knows?
But that was a really good sequence. That kind of sequence where they're storming the church and he's able to pour this metal through the kind of statues' mouths, and they just kind of just drop onto people. And obviously, molten metal, not something that you want dropped onto.
Unpleasant. But yeah, I think that is a very intense sequence, and you get the danger of it and the fear that everyone's feeling, and Quasimodo too. And you watch it and you're like, no, Quasimodo, don't do that. But because you're really invested in it at the time. So,
Josh, is the worst part for you being the king of fools that you were called the ugliest person in Paris, or that you were paraded through the streets and you have to see other people so close up?
It doesn't sound like a fun thing, although Quasimodo seems to enjoy it at first, at least, right? Until Frollo makes him give back his crown.
Does he fully understand it, or is he just happy that people are like paying attention and being nice to him, or what is it? Because he's always watched it from above, but he's never been a part of it.
Right. I mean, I don't know. I feel like at that moment, you think maybe he doesn't understand what's going on. But later in the movie, when he talks more, he doesn't seem like he's intellectually stunted per se. He seems
not at all. Yeah.
So I feel like he probably does understand what's going on. And even if it is a bit harsh, as it is when you judge me the same way, he's probably just happy to have people, like you said, pay attention to him and be nice to him. And it's done in good spirits, it seems like. That's the way it's presented.
Josh, I didn't vote for you for the King of Fools.
So
come on, man.
You're just saying that everyone else believes this, right?
Yeah, okay. Of course. No, I think what it is also is, there's this kind of sadness to Quasimodo because he himself calls himself ugly, and the last line, "Why wasn't I made of stone like you?" and all this stuff. So, I think it's like the song goes, Josh. You take the good, you take the bad, you take them both, and there you have the facts of life.
That is certainly influenced by the Hunchback of Notre Dame, very much so.
Yep.
So finally, in some enthusiasm, unabashed enthusiasm for this film, in their unbylined review, the Film Daily said, "Seldom has costume drama been so infused with suspenseful dramatic action. Seldom has spectacle been so enriched with adventure, so fascinatingly aglow with the essence of romance. Seldom, importantly, has a sense of the climactic been so finely manifested. Seldom, finally, has music been more adroitly used as cinematic embroidery. The settings, many of them vast, are magnificent, and William Dieterle has peopled them in a fashion to stir bravos. Against this impressively picturesque background, Dieterle unhesitatingly guides his players with keen appreciation of dramatic values, ever carrying forward the action and keying tempo to the particular needs of the sequence at hand."
Seldom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like a nice rhythm they get going there in that sentence.
I was like, did they bet the writer that he couldn't get seldom into the review 7 or more times?
Yeah.
Romance. Obviously there is this whole element with Esmeralda of the romance. The romance for me is so background to it, and it's obviously the Quasimodo element of the romance or the longing works for me, but the rest of it, I get it from a plot device, but I didn't think it really kind of, I didn't look at this as a sweeping romance by any means.
No. I mean, Esmeralda has this sort of like longing for Phoebus, who's this guard who saves her, and he's barely a character. I mean, they barely have a connection before he gets killed, and that's one thing that's very different in the 23 version. He's a very prominent character, and their romance is basically like the center of the story. And he doesn't get killed. And in fact, that's the same as in the book, as from what I've looked up, that they changed that for this version. But in both the book and the 23 film, he's just injured in that attack. And so he recovers. And the happy ending of the 1923 version is Esmeralda and Phoebus like getting together and like, you know, having their romance blossom and being happily ever after or whatever, which I think is definitely not in the book and is not in this version either.
Well, this is Grenoir, the street poet who ends up with her. He's a real street rat, like that Aladdin.
Yeah, he is much like Aladdin. And he's a much less prominent character in the 23 version. And in the book, she doesn't end up with anyone because she's dead.
Well, spoiler alert on that.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't read it, but I did read the Wikipedia summary. And it's, you know, just to also see how these movies have changed the book in certain ways. And I mean, I think, you know, Victor Hugo is writing a tragedy, right? He's writing a book that is meant to highlight inequality in Paris, in Parisian society. And that's not surprising that that's the result of his book, but it's also not surprising that Hollywood movies want to change that.
I think Grenoir is maybe a weaker element to this film, not the performance, but just that character is just kind of like there in support of others, but doesn't really add much to any of it, I'd say.
Yeah, and their romance, for whatever it might be, isn't much anything either. I mean, she agrees to marry him just to save him from being hanged by Thomas Mitchell, the king of the beggars, and basically says like, oh yeah, I don't love you. I just was trying to help you out. And then she kind of does.
He falls in love with her.
Right. And she kind of comes around by the end, but it is pretty underwhelming.
This was a big trend in 1939 of like women like ending up with guys and then realizing that like, oh, I do love this other person. You know, we did this with Gone with the Wind. We've done it with a few of these, I feel like.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that is a common device in movies from this period where people fall in love really, really quickly, or they're forced to be together and then they decide that they're in love and then the movie ends. So definitely a weaker element here, I think.
When's the last time you were in love?
I'm in love with doing this podcast.
Yeah. You're the king of the podcast.
That's
Josh.
better than being the king of fools. Thank you. Jason, had you seen this film or any Hunchbacks before?
I don't think I'd ever seen any of them. I did watch the 1996 Disney one as a reference point when that was, you know, we've talked a lot about Disney animation, and that was in that low period after kind of Aladdin and the Lion King, I'd say. And is that right? Yeah, that sounds right. And it's not very good. It's not very good at all. It just feels like they took a lot of things from other movies like Aladdin, and they're like, we'll just kind of do that again, but in lesser versions of it. So this movie is better than the Disney movie, Josh.
I believe it. Yeah, I had never seen that Disney movie. I feel like maybe we're a little too old to have had that been like a childhood favorite or whatever. And even though it is a lesser Disney movie, I feel like it probably does have a big following because people, if they saw it when they were 8 years old or something like that, just enjoyed it because it was Disney.
Maybe, but I don't think we hear a lot about, you know, we hear a lot about Aladdin and the stuff after it, but, you know, I don't hear a lot of people like, oh, Hercules, Tarzan, you know, Hunchback. Those are my favorite Disney movies. That's why this was the down period.
Right. Well, yeah, absolutely. There's way more acclaim and interest in those other ones. But I feel like any of those that you just mentioned, for people who saw those at like the right time as children, they are really, really into those. As a Hercules, especially, I think has a big fan base and was supposed to get its own live action remake, although that may or may not be happening.
Yeah, that one wasn't that.
Yeah,
bad, but you're a mark for James Woods. So,
I've never seen that one or Tarzan, so or the Hunchback for that matter. So I can't say I watched that. Like I said, that 1923 one instead, which was an interesting experience, and I had not seen any versions. I had not seen the Disney one or anything else, and nor had I read the book. So this was all new to me. Dave, we know you don't read books, but had you watched any Hunchback movies?
When you first mentioned that we were going to be doing this, I thought it was the Disney movie, and that was just from 1939. But
Wait,
that's amazing. That's so awesome.
You thought
Seriously,
a movie
I thought
from the
that
90s
was the movie
had
we
been
were
made in the
covering.
30s?
100%.
This was the follow-up to Snow White for Dave.
Yeah, I even went to Disney Plus to go watch it, and I'm like, wait a minute, 1996.
That's so awesome.
Yeah, so that's where I'm at, guys. So
Well, We're glad to give you that kind of education here. So anything else you want to mention about the background of this film, Jason?
A lot of actors were up in the casting process for this, including Lon Chaney Jr., Josh, to play the Hunchback.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that makes sense because, of course, he was following in his father's footsteps. He did eventually play the Wolfman, which I don't know if it was this earlier than this or it might have been a little later than this. But I mean, that was his really most well-known role.
Yeah. Also, some of our favorites, Boris Karloff.
Yeah.
Orson Welles. We love him.
Sure.
Peter Lorre. Big fan of the show.
Are you going to do your Peter? I feel like a Peter Lorre impression would be or an Orson Welles. Those are like go-to impressions for everyone, right? Can you do those?
Yeah, I'd have to listen.
Right.
I don't have it off the top of my head. As I always remember from The Critic, the Orson Welles green pea commercials. Yeah. Ooh, look at all this green penis.
Yeah. I feel like all of those actors, I mean, those are all very well-known.
Paul Mooney. Yeah. That was the other one.
But especially Karloff and Peter Lorre and Orson Welles, these actors with this big presence and distinctive voices and known for kind of over-the-top characters. Like all of them could have done well with this. But I do think Laughton, again, he brings that sort of honest emotion to it that maybe someone wouldn't have if they were trying to go bigger with it.
I agree. There's a very kind of grounded aspect to his performance. So I wonder what our friend Bela Lugosi would have done.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I like Bela Lugosi, but I'm not sure he could have pulled this off.
Well, you were his heroin dealer.
Yeah. So we'll come back in a moment and talk more of our general thoughts on The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this special bonus episode for our season on the films of 1939, we are talking about The Hunchback of Notre Dame. And we've been talking a lot about Charles Laughton, but I feel like we got to mention Maureen O'Hara as Esmeralda, who is nearly as important a character as Quasimodo, I think, in this story. There's at least one film adaptation of this that's just called Esmeralda. So she's important. And I think Maureen O'Hara is great.
Maureen O'Hara had just come over to the U.S. She was it Jamaica in the Hitchcock movie? And she was 18 years old. And they said, she's got it. She's got the goods, kids. And they put her in this, and she definitely holds up here. I mean, all the acting is pretty top notch in this movie, I'd say.
Yeah, it is. I mean, you got Cedric Hardwicke as Frollo, who is the villain here, and hey, he's not a good guy. We get a lot of his villainy. I think it comes across. You really hate him.
He's the original Cedric the Entertainer, Josh.
That's so true. What if Cedric the Entertainer? Could Cedric the Entertainer have? I feel like he could play Quasimodo in some sort of weird comedic version of it.
Dude, this sounds like we're onto something. Remaking the Hunchback of Notre Dame, but like with Cedric the Entertainer, we can reset it to, he's from St. Louis, the Hunchback of St. Louis or something like that.
Well, wouldn't he be the Hunchback of Notre Dame, the college?
In St. Louis? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Or what? Yeah, we could do that too. Who knows? So,
I'm surprised no one's done that already.
We're really missing out here.
Yeah. But anyway, we got this movie.
Yeah, no, all the acting's good. Two things that I noticed in our letterbox, Josh. Mine is go for Jason. Yours is something. And but no, you and I both marked down the amazing use of light and shadows, and to give it that gothic tone. And the use of space. We talked about this with, I think, Son of Frankenstein too, but like the use of space and light is really just expertly done here.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff in this movie, a lot of times where it looks almost like film noir, where the characters are kind of like skulking through these back alleys. And, there's moments where, especially Frollo, because he's the villain, is lit in this way that just highlights his eyes, which is a very common like film noir visual cue. And I really liked that approach because this is a movie about shady people and, backroom dealings and that kind of stuff. I mean, it is about society and the sort of changes that are going on during this period in France or whatever, but it has a kind of noir tone, and I thought that really worked well.
Yeah, it's interesting just kind of looking at that and the aspect of technology with the printing press, right? How the kind of printed word could change the world, kind of like when us kids were youngsters and like this internet, that's going to be the next big thing, right? So
right.
But I agree with you. This is, I don't know Dieterle at all, really, as a director. And I think he has a real point of view here and he executes it at a high level.
Yeah. He's clearly the right guy for this. And I mean, the printing press is one of those things. I mean, they're very obviously trying to situate this in history, sometimes clumsily. I think there's one point where the king is like, oh, who was that guy we heard from? Christopher Columbus, was it? And it was just like, okay. But they're definitely trying to give you a sense of what was going on in the world and how things were changing at this moment.
Yeah, so if we want to call that like a clumsy line, I did think there were some really clever lines with like, especially with where we're at in society today, where they're talking about not letting the foreigners in. And, the guy says, foreigners, you came yesterday, we came today, right? So the people who were holding them out were those people right before they were those people.
Right. I mean, and that definitely applies to where we are today, sadly. But of course, it's also something that the filmmakers here were putting in because of where things were at that time with the rise of the Nazis. And William Dieterle and Bruno Frank, who is the writer credited with the adaptation, both fled Germany because of the rise of the Nazis. And the idea of these foreigners being persecuted, the foreigners here being gypsies or Romani, I assume, being persecuted by the government and not allowed into the city or kind of confined to certain areas or whatever. Obviously, that was meant as commentary on what was going on in Europe at this time.
Yeah, what I had read is Sonya Levien, the famed screenwriter who, did this draft, also, really made sure that they honed in on that aspect of it. And we didn't. I don't think we've talked about her, but she's a legend. From this year, she did Drums Along the Mohawk, Oklahoma. Look her up. She's just done everything. An Academy Award for Interrupted Melody. She's one of the all timers.
Yeah, and she's Russian, but she is Jewish, and as well as Bruno Frank. And I'm not sure if William Dieterle is as well. But I mean, certainly this is something that's going to be on all of their minds because of their backgrounds.
Yeah. Speaking of which, Josh, we talk a lot about the Cannes Film Festival. Did you know this was the first ever film shown at the Cannes Film Festival? And this was shown in the one that we've discussed had to be canceled.
Yeah, this was the only movie that was shown. It was shown as a gala kind of private premiere the night before the official start of the festival. And then the next day, the festival was canceled. So this was the only one that was actually shown at that festival that year.
Josh, the other element to me that worked is really great set pieces. And when we were kind of talking about like the harshness of the viewing, like how about the set piece where Quasimodo's getting whipped and everyone's like enjoying it and he just needs water and he's spinning around on the platform and it's just so cruel and brutal and it's shot in such a way that it makes you both obviously empathize or sympathize with him, but also like it's hard to watch.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, it's highlighting the brutality of this time period, which I think is something that was what Victor Hugo wanted to do, but it's also showing general, man's inhumanity to man kind of thing that they want people to understand. And that, we sympathize, as you said, with Quasimodo, which I think is important because this is a story about someone who's disabled and is held up as a quote monster or, held up for mockery or whatever. And we want to humanize him. We want to see how that mistreatment, as you were saying before, basically leads to him lashing out there at the end. And is because he's been so downtrodden for his entire life.
I think so. I mean, there's the whole element where, like we had mentioned, Frollo becomes like beyond infatuated, obsessed with Esmeralda. So he kills Phoebus, right? And then he says like, well, it's her fault because she bewitched me, right? And like, we hear that now and we're like, dude, just go to jail, bro, But you looking throughout history, that could have literally been a defense that would have worked.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And Esmeralda accused of being a witch, that's the thing. And there's in the 23 version, there's a really brutal sequence where they torture Esmeralda to get her to confess. That's quite intense and crazy. So, yeah, I mean, I'm thinking of, we're talking about how does this have contemporary resonance with the way that foreigners are treated, but also Frollo is very much like modern, incels or whatever, who are like, I am so sexually attracted to this woman that I must destroy her, and that's kind of the way that, like, either I must have her or she needs to go to prison and then be hanged.
Well, yeah, I would also say that there's a gentleman, and I use that word completely incorrectly, a fellow running for president again who never took responsibility for his actions and should be in jail right now, but of course just gets to run for president. So maybe Frollo will be our next president.
Yeah, Frollo. Well, unfortunately, maybe fortunately, that's not how the political system worked in this time period. And I thought it was interesting that the king here, King Louis the 11th, I think it is, and I don't know anything really about the real King Louis the 11th, but he's portrayed
loser.
Really, maybe did you research him? Do you know anything about him?
He came before King Louis the 14th. Mm-hmm. The Sun King. L'état c'est moi. The state, it is I.
Right. But so we think of people like that as these very autocratic, self-centered rulers, but King Louis the 11th here is portrayed as this kind of folksy old guy who's very open-minded. And, Frollo is like, the printing press will destroy our society when people can talk to each other and get their opinions out. And the king is like, oh, give it a shot. I kind of like it. It seems cool. And he tries to help Esmeralda. Of course, he tries to help her eventually by giving her another one of these sham tests for whether she's guilty. But at least he's trying, right?
He is trying. Josh, would you rather live under King Louis the 11th's reign or King Louis from the Jungle Book's reign?
I had a feeling you were going to ask about King Louis from the Jungle Book. And King Louis from the Jungle Book seems very volatile. So I'm going to go with this King Louis.
Yeah, but he's a good singer.
Well, we don't know. Maybe this one is too. We haven't given him a shot.
We have not. That's true. Josh, there's some really funny stuff in here where they're at the festival and they're talking about how you mentioned Columbus, the earth is round, and the doctor just keeps chiming in, the earth is flat. And then another sentence goes on, I know it's flat. I've traveled across Europe. It's all flat.
Yeah. And again, I'm thinking of modern times when there are people, I was just seeing the other day on social media, some hot football prospect from college, talking about how the earth was flat. So.
No, but that guy went way beyond that. He said he doesn't believe in like planets or space.
Yeah, he sure did. He sure did.
So that's a step above.
Yeah. So really, 15th century France is making its comeback here.
It feels like it in more ways than I would like,
yes,
Josh.
Yes, indeed.
Next time they storm the Capitol, they're going to pour molten metal on it.
Don't give them any ideas.
Dave, what did you think of this movie?
I mean, you guys have been talking about how beautiful it is and how great Laughton is in it. Those are the main things to me. It's an incredible looking movie and he is great in it. Story wise, I mean, it's such a simple story that it didn't really do that much for me in that department, but it's really enjoyable to watch regardless.
Well, and I wanted to get your both opinions on this because this is awesome Thomas Mitchell year. But to me, the king of the beggars, I guess, that whole element. Josh, what's the proper name for the group? I mean, they call them gypsies.
The Romany. Yeah.
Yeah. So the whole Romany side story and, living in the kind of secret area underground or whatever, like I felt like that. And then also kind of the love triangle. A little less would have been more there. I didn't think those were the strong points. When we get away from Quasimodo or Frollo, that's when we're kind of hitting the doldrums of the movie.
I agree.
Yeah, I think so too. And on the other hand, I feel like they're underdeveloped. So, maybe we needed more in order to better understand like Gringoire and why he falls in love with Esmeralda and what his life is like and the King of the Beggars and that whole underworld. But also, you're right, they're not all that interesting. And I don't know that I would have wanted more of them, but it feels like they're a bit unfinished. And Thomas Mitchell at one point late in the movie has a really great bit of dialogue where he talks about like why they're beggars and the idea, again, something very much that's contemporary, the idea that like, hey, they're just stealing so that they can eat and the elites are stealing like the country, I mean, and that's, I think, what we talk about a lot these days about, billionaires legally, amass this amazing amount of wealth by exploiting poor people, and then poor people get arrested because they're trying to just survive. And I think that was an interesting perspective, that most of the time he's not offering you that. He's just kind of a silly figure.
Yeah, that was a good speech, because he's talking about, hey, we try to work and no one's giving us jobs. So what do we,
Right.
have to do here? So I wonder though, like, could we have eliminated the Gringoire character and maybe put a little extra emphasis on, the beggars or whoever, and just kind of, I think maybe this could have used some editing, and, obviously I'm the one to tell them that.
Yeah. Well, I think, we could have maybe eliminated him. I mean, he is a figure from the book, but I think also, as a Hollywood movie from this period, they want some sort of dashing young man like Edmond O'Brien there to be able to romance their beautiful young star, Maureen O'Hara. And, he's the one to do it, right? Frollo is a villain and Quasimodo is Quasimodo, and Thomas Mitchell as the king of beggars. He's older. You got to have somebody in there who's going to be the sort of classical leading man type, I think, is what they want.
Well, I think that Phoebus character, like you said in the 23 version, they could have whatever combined or just moved some elements over from one to the other. And I think that would probably have streamlined it, at least for, I'm not judging the book by any means, but I think for the movie that could have worked there.
Yeah, possibly so. And again, in the 23 version, Gringoire is there too, along with Phoebus, but he's just a less important character. And on the one hand, you're right. On the other hand, like, all of the Phoebus romance stuff in that 23 version really kind of dragged it down, I thought. So I don't know exactly what would have been the best approach, but I do agree that this is kind of uneven in terms of which characters we care about and which storylines we're invested in.
Do you think, had the statues talked like they did in the 1996 animated film, it would have added to this one?
I'm thinking of like Gargoyles, the TV series, right, where those statues come to life and then they fight crime.
Nice.
Did they? So Quasimodo talks to the statues in that version?
Yeah, they're like his wingman. Like, hey, go after Esmeralda. You're the man, bro. But it's like, again, like I said, like, instead of getting Gilbert Gottfried, they got like Jason Alexander, I think, and a lady who sounds like Jane Lynch. I don't remember, but it didn't really work there, Josh.
Yeah. Well, it's better that they don't talk, because of course he has that famous final line, as you quoted, that why wasn't I made of stone like you? And of course, if they were talking, it would not have the same poignance when he says that.
That's a pretty heartbreaking line. I have a quote for you, Josh, on Charles Laughton. He was probably the greatest film actor who came from that period of time. He had something quite remarkable, his generosity as an actor. He fed himself into that work. As an actor, you cannot take your eyes off him. And that's by some actor named Daniel Day-Lewis.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's nice. Quite a compliment there. No one's spraying quinine water in Daniel Day-Lewis's face, right?
No, but you could see he might get, how would he have prepped for this role?
Yeah, he would have just lived as a hunchback for several years and gotten a job ringing the bells at Notre Dame on his own, I think.
Go deaf. In the
right,
process.
Yeah, he really would. So do we want to rate this, Jason, out of 5 hunches, 5 bells?
Bells?
5 bells?
Yeah, bells. Yeah. You're a bell.
I am a bell, so rate it out of 5, 5 me, the king of fools.
It's 3 kings of fools from me. So 14 more to catch up to you, Josh. But it's good. It's a good movie there. 3 kings of fools.
Yeah, I give it a 3 as well. I do think overall it's good. It was interesting to watch. I was not as super engaged with it. I thought it probably didn't entirely help that I had just watched a very similar telling of the story like 2 days earlier. But it's something that I'm glad we got to check out. And if you're interested in this period, definitely watch it. Dave, how would you rate this?
I gave it 3.5. I feel like I'm probably on the same level as both of you, though.
Yeah, you're just more generous with the ratings in general.
That's right.
I think.
That's right.
So we'll come back and talk about the legacy of the Hunchback of Notre Dame. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year in this special bonus episode for our season on the films of 1939. We are talking about The Hunchback of Notre Dame, and we've mentioned some of the other adaptations. Of course, the 23 version before this and a bunch of other silent versions. That 1996 Disney movie, probably even if it's a lesser Disney movie, still the most famous version of this. Jason, is there any other things that you want to mention about that one that you watched with your daughter?
Instead, I would rather point everyone to the direction of the 1989 comedy Big Man on Campus, also known as The Hunchback of UCLA and The Hunchback Hairball of UCLA in the United Kingdom.
Have you seen any of those?
Come on. No, but I mean, it stars Jeremy Kagan.
I don't know who
Corey
that is.
Corey Parker, Josh.
No.
Cindy Williams.
Oh yeah, I've heard of her.
Yeah. Melora Hardin. You know who that is.
Sure I do. Are these all in the same movie, or were you talking about multiple movies?
This is
This is Big Man on Campus?
Yeah. Tom Skerritt.
Oh yeah.
Come on.
Who plays the Hunchback in that one?
Oh, let's look who the Big Man on Campus is. Maybe it's Alan Katz, who plays the character Bob Maluga Ooga Luga.
It sounds more like Encino Man with a caveman in it or something rather than the Hunchback.
No, I did watch, as you know, I've seen Quasi, the Broken Lizards version of this, which is a very minor Broken Lizards movie. But I watch anything they do, but that's not their best work.
Yeah, Dave, that seems like the one that you would watch, a lowbrow comedy version of this.
Yeah, I was actually going to try to, but I never got to it. But yeah.
So, Jason, did your daughter enjoy the Disney version of this?
So, yeah, enough so because afterwards there is a Hunchback of Notre Dame 2 on Disney. And she said to me, "Yeah, we should watch that. It'll probably be terrible, but we should watch that." So,
she's smart.
Yeah. I feel like that's the beginning of being a really true cinephile, is when you look at a movie and you say, that's going to be terrible. I should watch it.
I'm going to watch it right now. Josh, I have we rated this movie, but now that we've seen all 5 Thomas Mitchells, I think we got to rate the Thomas Mitchell performances of 1939 in order.
All right. What's your order?
Okay. From 5 to 1 or 1 to 5?
However you want to do it.
Okay. I'll go 5 to 1, Josh.
Okay.
So I think 5 for me is going to be this one, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, just because he had the least amount to do in it, I'd say. 4, I'll put Gone with the Wind, which, just beats this one out. But even though he was kind of just there and just hanging out. I'll go Mr. Smith Goes to Washington at 3, Academy Award Stagecoach at 2, and Calling Barranca, Only Angels Have Wings, easily number 1 for me.
Yeah, no, you know what? I think I might actually have the same ranking. I might put Stagecoach above Only Angels Have Wings. I do think what's impressive about his performance there is that he starts off as this buffoonish drunk, and then he brings so much depth to that character later on. But I would not quibble with your ranking there at all.
These are all very different performances, too. Really showed some range here.
Yeah, I think watching them all, I wonder if we hadn't put so much emphasis on him and realized he was in all these movies, if I would have even registered that these were all the same actor, or at least, all 5 of them, because they're such different performances, especially like Gone with the Wind. He really looks different and he's got an accent. And I might not have even really sort of been aware of that at the moment until like looking at the credits later on.
Dave, how do you feel about these rankings?
Yeah, I mean, I think you guys are probably right. I do think Only Angels Have Wings is where, that's got to be number 1. The others, it could kind of mix up a little bit, but I think you've got a good thing going on there.
All right.
Hey, I got a good thing going, Josh.
Yeah.
So I just running through some of these other Hunchbacks. I haven't seen any of these, but it's got a lot of interesting adaptations. The 1956 movie seems to be kind of a bigger one after this one, and the Disney one with Anthony Quinn as the Hunchback and Gina Lollobrigida as Esmeralda. There's a 1982 TV movie with Anthony Hopkins as Quasimodo and Leslie Ann Down as Esmeralda, and a 1997 TV movie with Mandy Patinkin as Quasimodo and Salma Hayek as Esmeralda. That's an interesting combo.
And in that one, Quasimodo solves crimes with offbeat methods. And his own just kind of weird disguises.
You joke, but I would absolutely be not at all surprised, given that this material is in the public domain, if some Quasimodo as a detective TV series were announced.
I mean, to me, I think the move. Obviously someone will do a horror version of this, but to me, what would be more interesting is if they did a gender swap version of this.
Yeah, and I'm sort of surprised that hasn't happened, although it may have happened like on stage or in other versions. Like there's also, because this isn't the public domain, I'm sure there's a ton of low budget versions that are not necessarily like well known, but it wouldn't surprise me at all if there's one of those somewhere out there.
Yeah, I think somewhere out there. You're in the wrong Disney movie now, Josh.
What's the best song from the Disney Hunchback of Notre Dame?
I don't remember any of them, but they weren't terrible. I think the first one is probably the best one, but I don't remember it. Victor Hugo, Josh, also wrote something called Les Miserables.
I think, I've heard of that.
Oh, Les Miserables. Yeah. That's how it's from. Les Miserables. He was known as the Ocean Man. What a cool nickname. And when they had his state funeral in Paris, over 2 million people attended, the largest in French history, Josh.
Yeah, I mean, he's a titan of literature, certainly. I mean, that's this and Les Miserables, obviously adapted over and over and over again.
Yeah, I think we got to combine them now. Like I said,
Quasimodo versus Jean Valjean, right?
Oh my God! Yet again, you're killing it, buddy. So
we're just we're always making these versus movies, so we might as well just go for it.
Did you know that William Dieterle won the Academy Award for Best Picture? He directed The Life of Émile Zola, another French figure. It was the second biographical feature to win that. And he was also nominated for Best Director for that.
Yeah, he's known. I haven't seen that, but he is known for doing a lot of biopics. I have seen Juarez with, I believe, with Paul Mooney, who we were just talking about, which is not a great movie. But he also directed The Story of Louis Pasteur, another biopic. And he's very prolific. I've seen a handful of his films. He made a bunch of mediocre Bette Davis movies, and I've seen like every single Bette Davis movie. So I've seen those. Juarez is one of them. A couple of his pre-code films I've seen that I enjoyed with, I think both with Kay Francis, Man Wanted and Jewel Robbery, that are fun kind of caper type movies with a lot of saucy dialogue. But he had an incredibly long career, very, very prolific. He was from Germany, worked in Hollywood, returned to Germany later in his career for a few films and retired in 1965. But a massive filmography, this guy.
Yeah, the other one I would mention is The Devil and Daniel Webster from 1941.
Have you seen that?
So, no, right. I just said I'd mention it.
Well, and you did.
I did find it interesting that one of the editors was Robert Wise, the legendary film figure, who has Academy Awards for Best Director and Best Picture for West Side Story.
Yeah.
And The Sound of Music. Josh.
Yeah, I believe he started as an editor and worked on, like The Magnificent Ambersons, I think, with Orson Welles and a lot of classic films before he...
Yeah, Citizen Kane.
That too. And before he became a director. So, it wasn't surprising to see his name on this.
Yeah, co-edited with William Hamilton, who did Stage Door's The Suspicion. I also thought, here's an interesting story. The original person to play Frollo was going to be Claude Rains, who mentored Laughton and John Gielgud at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts. But those two had a fight, Rains and Laughton, and they said they would never work together or speak together again.
Oh, man, that's a shame. Yeah, Claude Rains would, Cedric Hardwicke is good, but I feel like Claude Rains maybe has a bit more presence. That would have been pretty cool to see him in that role.
What about Cedric the Entertainer?
We're just going to cast him in all the roles in the remake, right?
Well, this was another fun fact that I picked up from about Laughton. Feeling in pain because his native Britain had declared war on Germany, Laughton rang the bells over and over again until he fell down from exhaustion, overwhelming the crew with emotion.
Yeah, that's something that Quasimodo would do. So, is really getting in character there. He's, of course, a legendary actor. He won an Oscar, I believe, before this for The Private Life of Henry VIII. Also,
Another King.
Another King. Yeah, that's true. All over the place. All these biopics. Then as now, getting the Oscars. I recently, fairly recently watched Witness for the Prosecution, which he's the star of and is great in, and is a very, very, very different role from this, but he's very entertaining for that, but also had a major stage career and was a stage director and is notable for one of the greatest one-off film directing careers of all time, directing The Night of the Hunter, which is the only movie he ever directed, which is a classic and is a great, great film.
Yeah, I want to talk about that. He was also nominated for Mutiny on the Bounty. I agree with you. Like that is a cool thing, like to do the mic drop one film type thing. I think we kind of talked about that when we did Man Bites Dog to me, that's that same type of thing. But I know you guys both love Night of the Hunter. I watched it. I liked it, but I feel like I'm missing the boat on it.
Yeah, it's great. I remember, I don't know if I did it, if we did a piecing it together episode on this, Dave, or it was before that. But one year when I watched it, I think it was, at or near the top of my, favorite first time watches from a particular year. So yeah.
Same with Dave.
Yeah.
No,
Dave picked it number one, I think, that year.
I don't think it was my number one, but yeah, no, it's great though. Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't know. You're wrong, Jason.
No, I'm not. I don't dislike it. I just don't love it. And I'm wondering what I didn't connect with.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, it's been a while since I watched it. I don't know if I can give you any specific details, but I mean, Robert Mitchum's performance in that and just, the portrayal of evil and the look of it, talking about it's got this kind of German expressionist style influence and the child performance and just the brutality of the story. Like, it's a fantastic film.
Yeah, and a fun impression. I'd have to listen to it again, but oh, you kids, you're being bad again. I don't know. Leave me alone, Josh. Go on.
Maureen O'Hara, as we said, this was a big breakthrough role for her. She worked into the 1960s, was very well known for her films with John Wayne, including The Quiet Man and Rio Grande, and she did a bunch of other Westerns as well. She was in Miracle on 34th Street and How Green Was My Valley, a lot of, classic films. Eventually retired and was retired for 20 years, but did return in the 90s, in 1991, after 20 years away from acting, to star or to co-star in Only the Lonely with John Candy. That was what brought her out of retirement.
I mean, who wouldn't want to work with John Candy, Josh?
Yeah.
Obviously, she did. And then she stayed unretired for a little while doing some TV work, won an honorary Oscar in 2014 and died in 2015. So quite an epic career for her.
In 2020, the Irish Times ranked her and as number one on Ireland's greatest film actors list.
Wow. Above Colin Farrell. I'm trying to think of it.
Bono?
Bono, I don't know.
Daniel Day-Lewis, Josh?
Yeah, there you go. Daniel Day-Lewis. Come on. Yeah. But I don't know if has Bono, I guess he was in Sing 2. So maybe that hadn't been released when they put out that list.
His daughter's a good actor.
Yeah, she is. She is.
Yeah. So Edmond O'Brien, Josh, he has an Academy Award and 2 Golden Globes and 2 stars on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, won the Oscar and the Golden Globe for The Barefoot Contessa and the Golden Globe for 7 Days in May. Has a lot of big time movies, White Heat, Julius Caesar, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. So The Wild Bunch, this guy's done some things.
Yeah. He's very prolific. And a lot of those are later in his career. As we said, he's sort of this dashing young leading man in this one. And then he aged into this more character acting career. But he also worked well into the 1970s in TV roles. Cedric Hardwicke, also a prolific actor, a lot of stage work as well. And if we had continued with the Frankenstein franchise after Son of Frankenstein, he, in the next movie, The Ghost of Frankenstein, he plays Frankenstein's other son, previously unmentioned.
Nice.
Jerry Frankenstein.
Yeah, I think it's Ludwig Frankenstein, but it's great watching those. He's like, I also am the son of Frankenstein, despite it never having been told before.
Yeah, I mean, but you mentioned, Les Miserables, 10 Commandments, and then on stage he did a ton of Shakespeare, did Pygmalion. He and Laughton were in Don Juan in Hell on Broadway in 1951 and 1952, also with Agnes Moorehead and our friend Charles Boyer.
Wow, that is quite a cast right there.
That is quite a cast, Josh. Walter Hamden, who played the Archbishop, also Broadway star, All About Eve, Sabrina. And then I wanted to mention Harry Davenport, who we talked about in Gone with the Wind, because that was the person that Bette Davis said, without a doubt, the greatest character actor of all time. He played King Louis in this one.
Yeah, and he's good because I think, again, you have this impression of what the king is going to be like, and then he plays it as this just sort of folksy old guy, like, oh, hey, I guess I'm the king. And it was an unexpected portrayal of a character like that.
Yeah, I marked down George Zucco, who played the procurator, which is a tough word to say, because of his work in Sherlock Holmes and the monster movies. And you just kind of see all these people just crisscrossing in all these different genres. It must have been pretty cool to do that back in the day.
Yeah. I mean, I think, some of it was these people were overworked and they didn't have a lot of agency in being able to choose their roles, but it does mean they play so many different kinds of parts and are in so many different kinds of films.
The composer, Alfred Newman, he was up against himself for best score at the Oscars with Wuthering Heights.
I think we mentioned Alfred Newman was like nominated for 46 Oscars and won like 11 or something.
Sounds about right.
We talk a lot about these guys. It's sometimes tough to keep track of who's whom, but I'm pretty sure he might be the most nominated person ever for an Oscar.
And the music is really good in this film. I mean, a worthy nomination there. So,
and when they said like, do you think you're going to get all this music done on time? Do you know what he said, Josh? What, me worry?
Yeah. That's a good one. Anything else you want to say about the legacy of this film, Jason?
Molten Metal.
All right. Well, look out for Jason's one-man show of the Hunchback of Notre Dame. That is the Hunchback of Notre Dame, and that is this episode of Awesome Movie Year. Ring our bells online and on social media.
Ooh, good one, Josh.
Thank you.
Ring my bell. Ring my bell. I'm Jason Harris Comedy, or Jay Harris Comedy on all the things. Eat This Comedy's back. So if you're here in April in Vegas, come see a show. I'm also acting in BattleBots. And don't forget to find me on Letterboxd. Go for Jason. We're awesomemovieyear.com. Awesome Movie Year on Facebook and Instagram. Awesome Movie Pod on the platform that I wish someone would pour molten metal on.
Yeah, it's probably going to happen. I am at joshbellhateseverything.com. Some old stuff is there. And maybe I wrote something about a Lon Chaney or Charles Laughton movie one time. I don't know. You can find me at Josh Bell Hates Everything on Facebook, at Signal Bleed on that unfortunate platform, as well as at Signal Bleed on Blue Sky and on Letterboxd. And listen to our producer, David Rosen's awesome podcast, Piecing It Together.
Check out Piecing It Together wherever you listen to podcasts. Follow us on social media at Piecing Pod. And if you're listening to this on the Produced by David Rosen Patreon, thank you very much for your support. I've got a special exclusive album hitting there very soon at the time this goes up, and lots of other great content to check out.
Hey, and since I plugged one of my events, make sure you look out for Dave's events, doing a lot of live Piecing It Togethers lately.
Absolutely. Check out piecingpod.com for the schedule, but I've got at least one a month the next couple of months.
And again, thanks to everyone who signs up for the Patreon. And if you haven't, and you want to hear these bonus episodes early, check out By David Rosen on Patreon. We always have bonus episodes from every season, and there's also Piecing It Together and Dave's music and a whole lot of content there. And we appreciate everyone's support.
And tell them about the hashtag, Josh. You love telling them about the hashtag. Tell them about the hashtag.
Jason's going to use it eventually. Yeah. If you review one of the movies that we talk about on Letterboxd, tag it with Awesome Movie Year. We'd love to hear what you think of any movie that we talk about, and then Jason can mock you on the podcast. So that's a privilege.
Josh, you're a beautiful man. You're the king of the podcast. I know you got a good sense of humor, so we're just having fun.
Of course we are. So tune in for more episodes coming up, and thanks for listening to Awesome Movie Year.
Thank you for listening to Awesome Movie Year. Make sure to follow Awesome Movie Year on Facebook, at Awesome Movie Pod on Twitter, and at Awesome Movie Year on Instagram. And if you like the show, review us and rate us with 5 stars on Apple Podcasts.
An All Points West production, produced by David Rosen in Las Vegas.
Josh, you're a beautiful man. Don't listen to them about the King of Fools.
Thank you.